Hey guys, Doug here from Motion Raceworks. Today we're back on the Golden Eagle Fox Body. This is our development car here at Motion Raceworks. And today we're going to be installing one of our lightweight Chromoly steering columns. It's a bolt-in unit for that car. And a lot of people see that and they think instantly weight savings, but there's actually a lot of other savings that go along with it. So we'll dive right in. We'll show you the ins and outs, what you get with the kit, how to hook up your intermediate shaft down to your steering rack, and hopefully kind of shed some light on what you're getting and what you'll need for the project. Right here on the left side is our powder coated. They all come standard powder coated. This is a lightweight steering rack or steering column for a Fox body, and then the factory one. So one of the areas that is an obvious advantage on running one of these aftermarket columns is the weight. The Fox bodies are actually fairly light from the factory at like 15.5 pounds, 15.35 pounds. That's on a postal scale, so you know it's good. A lot of columns are 20, 25, 30 pounds from the factory, especially later model stuff, because there's a lot more electronics and bracketry and everything. But obviously, this isn't the lightest steering wheel that we have available, but it's 7 3/4 pounds, so roughly half the weight, which is a good savings, especially where it's at, to go along with all of the other advantages that come with putting this in. As you can see, they're pretty similar. They bolt in the same style, the same way. We do have some adjustment built into this thing. The main noticeable thing is this thing isn't a tilt style column. A lot of them are tilt and they'll be a lot heavier than that 15.5 pounds, probably more like 20, 25, somewhere in there, like 20 to 21, I think is the number that sticks in my head. The other difference you'll see is we extended this steering shaft here. So we did that on purpose. Everything we do on these products are all by design. And the reason why we did that is to give you a little bit more adjustment in the room in the name of header clearance and coming through the firewall. The good thing is this column is all fully adjustable. So if it's not the length you want, if it's too long, we can easily adjust that. So let's just go ahead and get right to installing this, and we'll talk about some of those things. So this thing's all made in-house, even down to this lock bushing, the nylon bushings, the welded assembly and everything. These are all jig welded so that they're all reproducible and the same. You're not going to get one that's different or that's pulled out of a jig. And we do that for a reason, because we want things to fit how they're intended to be fit. So I talked about shortening this column. So as you know, there's different headers out there, and not every car is a turbo car where the manifolds basically don't run into anything. We extended this and gave you the ability to trim it down so that you could get past a header. You can always shorten it, but we wanted to give you as much as we could so you could have options. So let's just jump right into saying that, imagine that you have this and it's too long. As far as shortening things goes, it's simply as easy as this. We're gonna take this lock collar off the bottom, slide this inner shaft out through the nylon bushings, and then if you mark this ahead of time, you can actually trim this piece down. If you need to get very extreme, you can actually pop this bushing out, just stick this shaft back in there, and you should be able to tap it with a hammer. It'll pop right out, and then you can wrap this in tape and cut this down shorter if you need to. Our goal with this whole product was to make a one-size-fits-all thing. You know, you're building a race car. If you need to adjust things, you can definitely do that. The same goes for the other side on the driver's compartment. If you want to shorten that and then just put a wheel extension to make getting in and out of the car easier, you can absolutely cut that down and shorten it. So that gives you options. It's very easy to curtail this and make it exactly fit your needs. But we get a lot of questions about how you go about doing that. And then after you put the nylon bushings in, after you've shortened it, hypothetically, which a lot of people end up not shortening it, but if you needed to, you just put that lock collar back on, tighten it up, make sure you give it a good snug, and it's probably not a bad idea to put some Loctite on it, and you're all done. So before we get to installing, there's a variety of different wheels we carry. We carry Grant and MPI steering wheels. We have our own Motion Raceworks edition. This particular one is a 6-bolt wheel. We do have 6-bolt quick disconnects on request from people, but they're not standard. They come standard with a 5-bolt. So please, if you want a 6-bolt, we can absolutely help you with that. We can make sure that happens. Give us a holler, give us a call, shoot us an email, and we can make sure we get you adapted for that. As far as what comes with it, you're going to get your column with a quick release. That's the standard part. The wheel's bolted on obviously afterwards and not included. So you'll get a quick release, a Strange SFI quick release, and then your basic column. The quick release is already welded in there, and then you're going to get a firewall plate with one of these seals at grommets. That makes things really nice so you're not getting all the gases, and everything is sealed away on the firewall. And then you're going to get a hardware kit with these spacers. We've already removed our old column because I didn't want to bore you guys with video footage of taking that out, so we'll just jump right in. First thing we're going to do before installing the column is install the firewall plate. If you've ever heard Lyle Barnett's story about fire coming in the cabin and stuff, you understand how important it is to block off the firewall in every spot where it's open and fire can get in, because it finds its way in everywhere. So that's why we made this piece. We actually sell it separately also, so if you have a different brand column or you're just making your own for a chassis car, check out the description below. We'll have a link for that. But it just uses 3 bolts to bolt right up. It's NHRA legal thickness, and it comes with that seals at firewall grommet. Those are just going to be cross drilled and riveted in. If you look, the hole in the middle is actually quite a bit larger than the hole that's going through it. And we do that so you have some wiggle room. So if you adjust the column up and down for your own height, you can make up for that difference. I typically wait till after that's all mounted, you're happy with everything, then you can drill those rivets and rivet it in. Side note, if you lost the factory screws that go through the firewall, some self-tappers work just fine. They'll actually just run right through there. If you're like us, we've moved this car 3 or 4 times and lost a lot of that hardware. We're just going to toss these in there, leave that grommet loose, but we're going to feed our column through so it just kind of floats and gets happy. And we'll go ahead and go on to the next step of putting the column in after that. So this actually is going to sit flush on the firewall there. A lot of people ask us if it goes on the inside or outside of the car, and the answer is inside. The outside has a lip on it, so it won't actually sit flush if you try to put it out there. So we're going to go ahead and slide this right on to the column from here. Just let it rest on there. Like I said, once it's happy, then we'll go ahead and drill the rivet holes and put it in. So at this point, you're going to need our hardware kit that comes with it. All 4 bolts are the same. Has fine thread, locking nuts, and then these 2 spacers. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put that through there. And I want to show you guys, I don't have the aluminum spacers in here yet, but instead of making that steel bracket down in the bottom way thicker, we just use these aluminum spacers. It saves weight, just makes things a lot easier and doesn't make that long lever arm so flexible. So you'll see that this top portion bolts up flush, and then the bottom part will require spacers. The nice thing about how these bolt in is they have 4 bolts. So if you actually wanted to adjust the column down, you can bolt the bottom in and then just slide the top and just use washers or spacers to basically put it exactly where you want it so that you can fit whatever your driver is. But you know, we built this column to be able to fit kind of a broad range between running a factory seat or a Kirky seat. You know, like a lot of people are running these things. These cars aren't super tall, so there's not huge amounts of variance. The other thing you'll notice is the position of the column. It comes out basically right in the factory location. We did that because we didn't want to get it any lower because it interferes with your knees and gets really low for people. Just remember that this isn't a tiltable column. We basically hit a happy medium where you could still see your gauges, you could still fit in it. It was still a comfortable driving position for the average person. It may take some adjustment if you're super short or super tall, or you know, even moving your gauge cluster if you have like an aftermarket ECU dash. Just make sure that goes in your line of sight, but otherwise it's a very, you know, normal position. And then you'll also notice that it's slotted. One of the pieces of feedback we got because these cars are so small is that folks wanted to be able to move them towards the center of the car because the cage bars are right here. So actually people are having a hard time fitting their arms in between when they're steering. So this kind of gives them adjustability left to right, both on the bottom and on the top. So that'll also allow you to kind of kick that bottom out in case you have extreme header clearance issues. We try to make this fit as many positions and people and situations as humanly possible. This bottom portion here is always going to need this spacer. As I said before, we kind of designed it with that in mind so that we're not making that bracket heavier and longer than it needs to be. All right, so I got the bolts all in and snug but not tight. This is a good time to put your seat in the car, make sure that it fits you, make sure you don't want to space this top bolt down. As you can see, the bolts are long, so it allows you plenty of room for spacers. And you can kind of adjust things how you want. Also on the engine bay side of things, make sure that where the shaft's coming out isn't going to run into your headers or the frame or some type of motor plate or mid plate or whatever you have sitting there. A lot of variations in the engine bay side of things, and then adjust at that point before you finalize everything, because if you've modified your car quite a bit, there's a good chance something might need a little bit of tweaking here and there. So one of the other things that a lot of people don't think about with an aftermarket column as an advantage over the stock column, number one, as these cars age, a Fox body is over 30 years old now, they start to get real worn out and wobbly, so which is dangerous because wobbly is probably close to braking and it's just sloppy and you don't get a very good driver feedback feel to it. The other thing is not having a tumbler in the column for the key. My buddy Casey Rance down in Texas, he was driving the Texas Speed car. They had a 5th gen, it had factory column in it still, but the column didn't actually do anything for as far as starting the car. And so what he didn't know before he made a pass was the key was like kind of halfway in between on and off. Because it didn't affect anything, and going down the track the key actually went to the off position and rattled out. And so what happens when a key comes out of a column? It locks up, so he's basically going down the track with no steering. So for a race application, I can't really stress it enough to have an aftermarket column, whether it's ours or somebody else's. Build your own. We have a nice DIY column kit, but that's a piece of information a lot of people often forget. And then the last part is replacing that intermediate shaft between your steering rack and the column. Almost every car comes with some sort of rag joint, which basically gives the driver less of a vibration feel, just makes things more like a Cadillac, even though this is a Fox body. Those rag joints eventually wear out and tear. They get loose and they tear, and when they tear, nobody knows, but obviously having extra heat from headers and turbo manifolds and all that stuff can only make that happen sooner. So a lot of safety goes into having an aftermarket column, more than just how lightweight it is. The other thing that a lot of folks don't think about, we're not the only person with a Fox body steering column. We certainly weren't the first ones with them. There's a lot of cheap aftermarket ones on the market. A lot of times they're made out of aluminum, which I don't know why you would do, because aluminum is way more prone to cracking than steel is. The weight savings isn't really enough to make that a applicable thing, but most importantly, a lot of them use a knockoff or just generic quick release. So this is absolutely the most important piece of this whole column, just in the sense that putting the steering wheel on and making sure it's secure, and then also the run out and wobbliness of it. I've had tons of customers that had bought those cheap imitation knockoff, either quick releases or columns with quick releases, and they physically had them come off going down the track. If you look at the design of them, they're just unsafe to begin with. They might work putting in the car or on a bench. They might work for a little bit, but they're gonna fail. They're basically designed to fail. They're crap. So we sell the Strange SFI one. There's a number of good ones. Mark Williams makes a nice one. MPI makes a very nice one. I think Momo made one that Tim McAmis talked about, but I did hear some rumblings about, I don't know if there's something wrong with it or whatever. They may have fixed it by now, but there's a lot of, if it's got SFI on it, it means that it's gone through testing. It meets the certifications that what SFI thinks it needs to not be unsafe. So the Strange one, as I mentioned, is what we use. I really like it because it has a big fat keyway and the splines aren't super small, so it actually goes on relatively easy, and it's just got a nice crisp firm feel to it. It's got a spring-loaded piece here. If you put it together right, the top keyed spline will be right in line with your orange stripe, and it goes on very easy. Some of the other ones just don't go on that easy. That's just my personal preference, and that's why we sell what we sell. And then once it's on, it's just very secure. You can see when you spin it, it doesn't have a bunch of play side to side, and that's important too, because if you get one of those cheap ones, you can really feel it when you're going to steer and move it around. So just very minimal play and very smooth feel. And it's very easy to get on and off, because nothing's worse than when you're sitting in the staging lanes and you can't get it on, or you get it on and it doesn't click because it's not a favorable version or brand. and the first thing happens is you launch the car and you pull the steering wheel right off, and now you have no steering. Very important piece, whether you buy ours or somebody's. I suggest a Strange or Mark Williams or an MPI or some version of an SFI quick release. That's what makes our column more expensive than the bare bones cheapest one you can find, but it's not something you want to skimp out on. Okay, on to the next portion of our build. We have the column in the car. Now we need to hook it up to the rack. 99% of these setups end up going down to a Flaming River style rack, at least on a Fox body, or what's also called a Pinto Rack. And so that's gonna need they call it a 9/16 26 spline. You can see it's just got splines in there, and then it has a set screw on the outside. Very common hookup for an aftermarket race style steering rack. Now, if you get into like a 5th gen or 6th gen Camaro or newer Mustang, newer anything, they oftentimes have a electric steering rack or something like that. And so we do sell adapters for those style columns to hook up to those. But this is a kit that we have, and it comes with both U-joints you need and then the shaft. So as I mentioned before, it'll have that 9/16 to 9/16 26 spline shaft, and then it'll go to what we call a 3/4 double D shaft. As you can see, it's a double D for a reason, because it just looks like 2 Ds put together. And then on the other side, this is the side that will go to the column, it's 3/4 double D, and then it adapts to round, because these lightweight chromoly steering shafts are going to be round coming out of it because we have a tube going through it. It's a round tube. I will note, on our steering column, we actually use a thicker inner shaft for the reason of the fact that a lot of these cars end up being relatively heavy compared to a chassis car. Chassis cars will use, I think they'll use like down to like 39 wall chromoly tubing. We thicken that up a lot because we know a lot of our cars and customers' cars are a little bit heavier. So we'd rather just, put those extra few ounces in the car where they matter, where we have a little bit of safety. So we just feel it's really important to build these to the cars that they're going on, rather than just use the lightest weight thing we can find on the market. In the end of the day, you're only talking about an ounce or two for the whole piece, so it's a good trade-off. So as of this video, we actually made a kit with everything you see here, which will connect our column to a Pinto or Flaming River steering rack. I'll put the link in the description below. And that way things will be really easy on you. You can just grab the column, grab this on your favorite steering wheel, and you're ready to go. So on the other U-joint and one side of this U-joint, you have set screws. So that's pretty self-explanatory. You have a set screw and a nylock nut, so you can set it, tighten it, and lock it. On the side that goes to the actual column, the 3/4 round, you'll see that we actually have a hole drilled in these. And the reason why we do that is because there's a little bit of a difference of opinion on what people think is the best way to attach it. And we're not here to judge or make that decision for you. A lot of folks end up welding these, and then a lot of folks end up cross drilling a bolt and nut through it. But just make sure you use a high quality strength nut. Don't use something that's stainless steel. Don't use a grade 3 or 5. While the 1/4-inch bolt that's going through it in double shear has, I think like 6,000 pounds of force, you don't ever want to test it. So make sure you use a quality bolt with a nylock nut if you're going to go ahead and run it right through there. We personally always end up cross drilling it. So what we'll do is we'll just slide this over the shaft, finish everything else underneath there, and this will be the last piece that gets modified. So we'll put that on the inner shaft of the column, and then we're just going to use this as a pilot. So we're going to drill one hole, put the bolt in, spin it around, and drill the other hole, and then the bolt slide right through both sides of it. So another nice thing to know is if you're using a U-joint and it's not sourced from us, make sure that it has some type of mechanical lock on the caps that hold the U-joint in. Originally, when we first started building cars, there's several brands out there where they just have like a little dimple where somebody hits it with a hammer to hold that cap in. And depending if it's a Monday or Friday, if somebody's hungover or whatever, those don't get dimpled as well. And we actually had the cap fall out, and that creates a dangerous situation. So several years ago, a long time ago, we switched to, for us to sell a U-joint, it has to have a physical bolt holding the cap in. That cap will never pass the head of that bolt. And there's several companies out there that sell this style U-joint where it's captured with that. And I can't stress that enough, that if you're going to use a U-joint that you don't source from Motion, that it has that. So another thing to be concerned about, if you do end up welding that and it's your first time, just make sure you don't heat this up too much. I would suggest cooling it down, just doing small pieces at a time. Thing to think about is these are greasable or greased U-joints. So if you heat this thing red hot, it's gonna bake all that grease out of there, and then all of a sudden you have a seized U-joint, which is obviously not safe and you don't wanna do that. I won't actually show the video of us installing this because I think it's pretty self-explanatory. One thing to consider is to make sure that whatever shaft, whether it's the 3/4 double D or the round piece, make sure you have plenty of engagement. You can see the inner bore of that goes to right here. Make sure that shaft comes as close to there, because otherwise, especially if you're cross drilling this, you might have a real thin wall of where the bolt goes through, and there's, it could tear potentially. And then with the 3/4 double D, if it's too shallow in there, it's actually gonna wobble itself out, and if something moves around, the shaft will pull out and then you have no steering. So all points of contention, all things that you wanna consider when doing that. As I mentioned before, we build this so that you can basically adapt it to a lot of different cars. So we actually end up supplying you more length of this than you need. You can cut this down if you want to, but we wanted to make sure we had enough material and enough of a kit that everybody can adapt to whatever they're doing. Because if you shorten that column, this would be too short if we just made it a standard length. So simple hand tools, and you can go ahead and make your own. The other thing to think about is before you drill this last hole here, you'll want to make sure you have a buddy holding the steering wheel straight up and down. If you just drill it by yourself and don't pay attention to that, you're gonna have a crooked steering wheel. So the nice thing about the 3/4 round and drilling this hole is that you can pretty much put it wherever. You're not trying to line up splines. So that's a huge benefit. Make sure your wheels are straight, make sure your steering wheel's straight, and then go ahead and go through the process. I hope this kind of clears things up, makes the whole process more understandable, why we include what we include in the kit, how we built it, and why we built it a certain way. Like I said, we never arrive at a product on accident or just because. So everything's designed for a reason, and now you know what's available in the kit. We have these available for everything from Fox bodies all the way up to the newest style Mustangs, Camaros, trucks, everything in between. So check out our website. I'll also put a link for all the different option steering columns in the description below. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you guys next time.